Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Pointy Not Sharp. Today we're taking a look at French Model 1936 spike bayonets. These were made for a variety of different rifles. So initially they were made for the MUS 36, and then there's also the MUS 36 CR39, which is a carbine version with a folding stock for paratroopers. And they actually have a shorter version, but I'll get into that shortly. Then they also fit the MUS 3651, which was an updated version of the 36, and that has a phosphate finish, and that's what I've got with this one here. Then they also fit a couple of the trials rifles, like the MUS 40, and then they also fit the MUS 44. Not many of those were made, only 6.3 thousand, I think, for the Navy. I can't really remember. And then later they'll also fit the MUS 49 made for Syria, and there were 6,000 of those made. Now, while the rifles themselves were made by Saint Etienne, or manufactured arms Saint Etienne, the bayonets were contracted out to a number of private contractors. So you'll find very minor differences from contractor to contractor, and often they're not marked, so you don't know who made them. It's very rare that you find one that is marked with a manufacturer's code or date of manufacture or something like that. And they were made from 1937 until 1952, and in total 1.1 million were made. So there are a lot of these things out here, and you can get them pretty cheap because there's not a whole lot of interest in spike bayonets. They're not terribly exciting. They're not a knife or something you can hold in your hand, so I completely understand that. Anyway, we'll jump into the history. So these were designed to replace the pre-existing Lebel and Berthier bayonets, and as you can see with the cruciform blade, they were heavily influenced by the MLE 1886 bayonet that the French already had in service, or probably the R16 variation, which was a similar length to what we have here. Now, the MUS 36 was only ever designed as a stopgap in between the Berthier and Lebel and self-loaded rifles, or semi-auto rifles. And when they didn't really end up getting them out before war were declared in World War II, they just started manufacturing a lot of the 1936, and they saw a lot of use. They saw a lot of use all throughout the war, the colonies, all over the world. They're still in use today. They were used by over 30 countries, and they've seen extensive service, like throughout Africa, the Indochina War. What I find interesting about these as well is these are one of the few detachable bayonets that, when captured by the Nazis during World War II, wasn't given its own designation. So if you're familiar with the Third Reich nomenclature, when they would capture a rifle and enter it into their own service during the war, they would designate it a Gewehr. And when they would capture a bayonet to go with the rifle, they'd call it a Seitengewehr, and they'd give it a designation. They didn't do that with these bayonets. I assume it's because it's not something that you can use outside of the scope of using as a bayonet. So it really only has a single function. So for that reason, I assume the rifle was redesignated, what was it, the Gewehr 242F, but these weren't given their own individual Seitengewehr designation. Now, after the war, the French continued the development of self-loading rifles until they came up with one they liked, which was the MUS 49. And when they rolled those out, they actually didn't have a provision for bayonets at all. So these were essentially a thing of the past by that point. They made a small number for Syria. I believe it was 6,000, and the Syrian ones did take these bayonets. I believe this one here is actually a Syrian one, although I could be mistaken. There's no way to tell, but I've been told it came from a MUS 49 rifle. So I assume it's a Syrian one. Anyway, a couple of years after that, when they released the MUS 49/56, they introduced a new knife bayonet, which was the M1956 bayonet. I've already done a video on that. Check it out if you're interested. So that was really the end of the spike bayonet for the French. Now, that's not the end of the story for the MUS 36 bayonet, because it was actually pretty well received, and it was copied internationally. So During the Second World War, the Germans developed the FG-42, and with it, they had their FG-42 bayonet, which was nearly a perfect copy of the MUS-36 bayonet. The handle's a little bit shorter, the locking mechanism is identical, has a cruciform blade, and it's just a little bit shorter. And they weren't the only ones to copy it. The Swiss copied it as well with their Wrexham Favor. I've already done a video on that as well, so feel free to check that out. And that's essentially the same as the FG-42, except instead of having a cruciform blade, it's just a spike like the British No. 2 bayonet. Now we'll jump into the actual construction of the bayonet itself, and there's really not much to explain. We've got a cruciform blade with a point, and then moving down we've got our handle with a knurled section in the middle. The earlier ones have this horizontal knurling, while the later ones have a diagonal. Then looking at the handle itself, you'll see we have our two catches, one here and one here. And the way it works is it's a lever pivoting around a pin in the center, and there is a spring pushing this one out this way, and that also applies pressure on that one out that way. So there's a tube underneath the barrel of the rifle, and when not in use, you insert it into the tube, and there is a hole, and as the tube comes flush up against the knurling, the catch goes through the hole and is retained for storage. Then when you want to deploy the bayonet, you press your button, that disengages the other catch, you pull it free, reverse it, and put it in. Now, Ian McCollum has done a fantastic video, I think it's titled The French Finger Trap, about these bayonets, because there was a big issue with them. Initially, because it's reversible, you could attach two rifles together and there was no way to get them apart. So in 1951 there was an Arsenal memo for a modification. The rifle already had a 4mm hole on that tube, so what they did was they modified existing bayonets with a 4mm hole on the handle here, so that if you do attach two rifles together, instead of being unable to get them apart, you'll have that 4mm hole, you rotate the rifle and bayonet till the holes align, and then you can depress the internal spring or internal lever. The memo said with a firing pin, but you could really use anything, and that will disengage and you can pull them apart. They're collectively referred to as idiot holes. So if you come across these, yeah, idiot hole. So these two here have idiot holes. This is an earlier one and it does not, so it's unmodified. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there were two lengths. There's the full length and the carbine length for the MUS-36 CR39. So the full length one, which is what we have here, have an overall length of 432 millimeters with a blade length of 339 millimeters. The CR39 was a little bit shorter, having an overall length of about 384 millimeters and a blade length of 289. And that's really all there is to say about the construction. I guess I could mention the finishes as well. So the early ones sort of have like this bluing, and as I said, the later version produced in 1951 has a phosphate finish, and that's what we have here. And there's also a bit of inconsistency among manufacturers or contractors making these for Saint Etienne, and the differences aren't terribly noticeable, but it's just small things. Like if you look at the end caps, this one's rounded on the edge, whether this one's straight. This one has our cuts in either side, as well as our crimps, whether this one just has crimps. So very minor differences in construction. There was also a chromed version of these, and it's rumoured they were for the Republican Guard, but I can't confirm that. And finally, I'll jump into the markings. Many or most of these don't have any markings at all. Some of the early ones have a 2-digit serial number on the end cap. This one has 13. And I don't have access to any that do have the markings, but sometimes you have a manufacturer's code or digit date of manufacture on the blade or the handle, or the reverse of the handle on the opposite side to the press button. But I don't have access to any of those, and there's a good 10-20 different manufacturers, and they changed their own marking sequences and method of marking throughout manufacture, so there's so many different ways that these can be marked, and I don't even want to go into deciphering them because A, I don't have my head around it, and B, there's so many. I'll probably be more hurtful than helpful. Anyway guys, that's all I have to say about these bayonets. There's not too much to say really, they're just a simple spike, not terribly exciting, I know. If you managed to hang on this long and you're still watching, please hit the like button, and thanks for watching.